Do you think we're going to see a repeat of Genesis 6 in the near future?
Yes and no.
Or are we seeing that now?
Yes and no. Yes, in that there will be a similar occurrence in the earth of the same kind of miscegenation that happened in genetic miscegenation that happened in the antediluvian age. But no, in that it will look different. There's going to be some very key differences. I am not one who subscribes to the idea of a second incursion. And what I mean by second incursion is that there was another Genesis 6 type advent post-flood. In other words, another group of angels descended to the earth in a post-flood context and committed the same trespasses as the watchers in the pre-flood world. I don't completely rule out the possibility of such a scenario, but it's unlikely in my mind for several reasons. So I believe that kind of transgression, something akin to that, will happen again at the end of the age, and that will truly be the second incursion. There's a lot of dispute out there concerning how the offspring of the watchers made it through the flood.
Right. Yeah, that's something I've been wondering about too. And I know there's a couple popular theories. I have no clue. What are your thoughts? Like Numbers 13:33 says, yeah.
As far as I can tell, there's four possible contingencies.
Okay.
Let's see if I can remember them. The first one is a second incursion. In other words, it happened again. And angels fell again. They descended to the earth. They took wives among the children of men in a post-flood context. They copulated with these women, and they produced another race of giants. That, to me, is the most unlikely for several reasons. And I'll explain that after I cite the other three contingencies. The second contingency would be that the genomics, the genetic trademarks of the offspring of the watchers, the Nephilim races, made it through the flood via the genomes of the offspring of Noah, or specifically through their wives, through the wives of Noah's three sons, one of the wives. That's plausible. I don't necessarily subscribe to that, but I can't rule it out either, just as I can't rule out the contingency of a second incursion, although I would put that at the bottom of the list. The two contingencies that I think are most plausible are what I would call the necromancy contingency, which is something that Tom Horn really brought to the forefront when he pointed out that Nimrod began to be a mighty one in the earth. And you can interpret that he began to be a giant, or at the very least that he began to undergo some kind of a genetic transmutation and began to become something other than human. The reason why that transmutation began to occur, if it did indeed begin to occur at all, is unknown. But we can speculate that there was some kind of perhaps necromancy involved, perhaps a reconjuring of the spirits of the Rephaim, of the Nephilimic entities that had perished during the flood. So it would be some kind of sorcery, some kind of necromancy that would be involved, perhaps involving the Tower of Babel affair. We know that you had the Sumerians who were attempting to open the gates to the Abzu, to the abyss, and perhaps achieve that endeavor. And so I don't know. It's very misty when you look back at the first civilization, the Sumerians. You look back at the Tower of Babel affair, and you look back at Nimrod. It's very ambiguous. We don't really know a whole lot. What we do know is that what was happening in the days of Nimrod was insurrection. That much we know. Nimrod's name means rebel, or to rebel, or we shall rebel. So what marks the advent of the Tower of Babel is insurrection, rebellion. Does that rebellion have something to do with reconjuring these forbidden entities, or trying to bring down entities that were akin to the Watchers, perhaps, or another group of Watchers trying to make contact with non-human entities in other realms? We can speculate that could have been the case, and I think that there are strong indications that is in fact what was happening with the Tower of Babel. But again, we can only conjecture.
Right.
So that would be the third contingency, in my mind, much more plausible than the other two. But I have a fourth contingency that I think personally is the most plausible because it's the most practical. Mm-hmm. Not many people subscribe to this one. In fact, I hadn't ever heard anyone suggest it before I made a video where I suggest that somebody made it through. Somebody survived the flood. Something, we should say, survived the flood.
Right.
Either by going off planet or by going into the interior of the planet. I call this contingency the Exiles of Atlantis.
Okay.
And the reason why I believe that this is the most plausible, certainly the most practical scenario, is because if you consult with the myth and legend of the myths and legends of antiquity concerning this great civilization that was destroyed, the antediluvian civilization, this empire, what I call the empire of the gods that existed in the world before the flood, you will find a common thread in all of these different legends that seems to suggest that somebody made it through. Somebody escaped with some of the knowledge. Apart from Noah and his family. And of course, the different legends will record different details concerning the advent of the great cataclysm that destroyed the empire of the gods. For example, the Sumerians name a different individual that's very analogous to Noah and the story of Noah saving the two of every kind of the different animals and the species and so forth. Whereas other legends won't necessarily contain those specific details, but will have a storyline that is similar. Mm-hmm. But in many of these accounts, you have somebody surviving by way of divine providence, but then you have almost this concurrent narrative of not somebody necessarily surviving, but somebody escaping. And there are several accounts where that becomes vivid, and you even find indications that somebody escaped into the interior of the earth. Mm-hmm. And again, when I say somebody, something, I'm not referencing Noah. Obviously, Noah was made it through the flood by way of the ark and divine providence and divine protection. But then there's this other concurrent narrative of something escaping the flood, not necessarily surviving by providence, but escaping. Mm-hmm. And you can trace this thread through the myths and legends of antiquity, and especially as they relate to the mystery schools. Knowledge made it through the flood to the other side into the post-flood context by a surreptitious means. So either, again, somebody went off-world, off-planet, or went into the interior of the planet and was able to thereby escape annihilation.
I did write a book that just came out called The Return of the Watchers, Ancient Nephilim Technology Revealed, and this is what the whole thing is about. Right now it is available at prophecywatchers.com. Prophecywatchers.com. L.A. Marzulli, my very good friend, wrote the foreword. My very good friend, Dr. Larry Olison, wrote the afterword. And this is what this is all about. I even start off the back cover text with First Enoch 8:1-3, where it tells of Azazel, and it says, "And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them." That's technology. And bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony and the beautifying of the eyelids and so on and so forth. This is technology. So this is a fallen angel, a fallen watcher, that's teaching humanity things that humanity didn't know before and didn't need to know, Well, the same thing is happening now. Why is it happening now? Because we're in the last days. Because I believe it could be any day now. Any day we're gonna get raptured. But even if the Lord tarries a little longer, you never know if by rapture or death you are gonna leave this earth sometime, and we need to get right with Jesus before that happens. You don't want to be sealed in eternity in the wrong place, apart from God. But if you want to know a little bit more about the book, it's, the book of First Enoch teaches us about a time when 200 watchers fell to the earth, procreated with women, and taught mankind things they were never supposed to know. The book of Genesis tells us this event happened during Noah's lifetime. Jesus Christ himself taught that the end times would be like the days of Noah. We now live in a time when mankind once again is tampering with things that are forbidden and completely abominable to God Almighty. Has the influence of the Watchers returned once again in an attempt to corrupt and ultimately destroy humanity in these last days? Here's some things you'll learn about. Some of the stuff that we've talked about on this channel and a lot more. But how CIA psychics have been searching for the Ark of the Covenant. There's a story about that a while ago. See, that gets into the occultism. What Nephilim structures have been found under the pyramids in Egypt. That's a really interesting story. CIA declassified accounts of alien revenge attacks, what Nephilim and hybridization experiments are happening right now, Q-Day, and why the leaders and experts are so fearful of it. Talk a little bit about CERN, why people are worshiping an artificial god through artificial intelligence. This is literally happening. There are already religions, cults now, worshiping AI. And that's going to get more common. And again, don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, that's just a few crazy people, it's nothing. Every time people have thought that, they have been proven wrong. Because what that attitude does is it allows these things to fester, it allows them to grow and continue until it's too big to do anything about it. How the development of artificial consciousness can lead to the image of the beast. What the unholy spirit is and how it relates to artificial intelligence. That's a really interesting one. And then how to properly take personal responsibility as a watchman.
Now, there would be contention from the Christian community, certainly, of the notion of something or somebody escaping, because the Bible clearly says that all the creatures that God had made, the air-breathing creatures, the land-based creatures, were destroyed.
Right.
But there's no indication that the sea creatures were killed, for one thing. And for another thing, we're talking about entities, and this may be parsing terms here, this may be splitting hairs, but we're talking about entities that God had made, that God had designed to be in the earth. But we know, because of the Genesis 6 affair, that there were a lot of what I call unsanctioned entities in the earth that did not come about as a result of the providence of God. These were unsanctioned entities. Their existence was prohibited, and but they nevertheless came into being through the miscegenation of the Watchers, their copulation with human women, and these would have been very advanced entities. These were not the offspring of Adam, and these were not merely beasts of the earth. These were hybrids, and they would have had very advanced minds, and perhaps been wielding very advanced technology that was given to them, or at the very least taught to them, according to the Book of Enoch, by their fathers, the Watchers.
Right.
And so, might they have had the technology to survive the flood to some degree, or at least some of them? And I think that the answer is yes. I think that they might have had that kind of technology. So either way, all four contingencies assume infer, I should say, a couple of things. Mm-hmm. They infer that somehow the genetic line persisted into the post-flood world. The genetic line of the Watchers persisted. That's established. We know that's true, and we don't have to make that case because it's self-evident. But it also infers that no matter how you dice it, God allowed that persistence, the persistence of that genetic line into a post-flood context. So I've heard the argument that that the genetic trademarks of the Watchers could not possibly have been communicated through the flood via the genomes of Noah's offspring, because that would make God incompetent. But the fallacy of that argument is that you could make the same argument for any of the four contingencies.
Yeah, it survived somehow.
Yeah, the fact is that the genetic line was present again in the post-flood world. So somehow they reemerged. And I don't believe that speaks to God being incompetent. I think that what we have is a persistent insurgency against God that is continually active against him, this rebellion that is continually engaging in insubordination against the Maker, and by some way, through some mechanism, was able to propagate itself in the post-flood context. Mm-hmm. One of those, either by one of those four contingencies, or perhaps by some other contingency that we've not even considered. And maybe there are some other ideas out there that I'm not aware of, but those are certainly the four, in my mind, the four most prominent possibilities of how the Nephilim, for lack of a better term, made it through the flood. So, it doesn't matter to me necessarily how they made it through the flood. The fact is they did. Mm-hmm. So it's important to identify the implications of the hybrid race in a post-flood context, especially as it relates to the end of the age, and being able to differentiate between the post-flood incursion of not necessarily another incursion of fallen angels, but certainly the post-flood incursion of their offspring, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. and a final Genesis 6 type event that is going to reoccur in the earth at the end of the age. And none of this is simple. None of this can be expressed in simplistic terms, because these are very complex concepts. And rather than trying to simplify what's going on in the earth, I think it's better for all of us to attempt to elevate the complexity of our thinking.